Hi, it's Lee from Colouring Queen, and I've got another crime story for you to listen to today while I finish this book from Klara Markova's Little Secrets from My Fairy House colouring book. And I'm using my new Arrtx pencils on this picture. So if you missed part one of this video, I'll have a link below, as well as a link to the shops where you can purchase Klara's books from and where you can purchase the Arrtx pencils from if you so desire. Now, it's a very windy day here today in beautiful Queensland, Australia, so the wind is coming through the windows a little bit. So if you hear any background noise, that's what it is. And I've realised for the last, several of my videos that the audio has been off because I haven't had my microphone plugged in. So hopefully it is better today. I've spent some time fiddling around with it and hopefully it is better for you today. So today's true crime story is a doozy. When you get old, most of us don't think that we're going to have a life of crime. Well, I certainly don't, and I've got the grey hairs and wrinkles to prove it. But today's case involves some criminals that are senior citizens. Some of them are grandfathers and even a couple in their 70s. And no, it's not a case of defrauding the social security or healthcare system, which might seem more likely given their age. Instead, it's a jewel robbery worth millions. So today's case takes us to London and to the very fancy district of Hatton Garden. Now, Hatton Garden is filled with beautiful homes. It's well known and it has beautiful old churches, but it's probably best known for its jewellery district. In the small area of Hatton Garden, it's actually filled with over 300 businesses that are involved some way or other in the jewellery trade, from retailers and shops to traders and suppliers. It's like the Silicon Valley of jewellery, with the largest cluster of jewellery-related items in the UK, if not the world. So what you might not know is that Hatton Garden also has an underground system of abandoned railway platforms, vaults, tunnels, offices and workshops. And these were all said to have been built by monks in previous times. On top of this underground network, there are even more vaults, workshops and rooms that are all hidden from the prying eyes. And they're part of the many jewellery businesses operating in the quarter. So as you can imagine, with so many valuable items in the one place, the area has had its share of crimes over the years. With so many expensive items and stylish homes in a very contained space, it's bound to happen. Even in the 1600s, there were armed hold-ups within the residential area. And of course, the lucrative diamond district had its share as well. There was even the Great Pearl Necklace robbery, where a pearl necklace worth £150,000, some 150 years ago, was actually stolen and they substituted it with some sugar cubes or sugar lumps. Eventually, the thief was caught in that one. In 1993, Graff Jewellers, they lost over £7 million of gems in what was then the biggest gem heist. When armed robbers held up the store, they tied up staff and made away with a load of gems, including a heart-shaped 25-carat white diamond the size of a cherry. That was worth £2.2 million just on its own. And it wasn't the only time that Graffs were robbed, with a loss of £23 million in 2003 when they were targeted by the Pink Panther gang. And then just 6 years later, in 2009, the thieves arrived in a taxi and made off with an estimated $40 million in jewels. But today's case started in January of 2015. In reality, it started way before then. There was a lot of planning on this one. In January of 2015 in Hatton Gardens, several of the tenants in the Hatton Garden Jewellers started to feel that something was a little bit off. One jeweller in the 7-storey building felt uneasy, and he believed that he and his shop were being watched. Another felt that something odd was going on with the elevator in the building of the Hatton Garden jewellery vault. After waiting far longer than usual for the elevator, or lift as you may call it, when it arrived, an old repairman was in it. He was surrounded by building gear and tools, and he was wearing blue overalls. And because of the amount of things he had in the elevator, there was no room for her to enter it. Now this was all very unusual, and these were odd things, but at the time it was odd, but there wasn't really anything more than that. Then on Wednesday, April the 1st, a gas main ruptured and it slowly leaked gas into the tunnels. Now, as these tunnels house electrical and telecommunications cables, it wasn't long before a spark ignited the gas, which caused smoke and then flames to escape from the tunnels into the manholes at street level. The area surrounding the leak was evacuated and emergency services were directed to deal with the situation, which included many alarms being set off. There was looting, there was people taking advantage of the chaos, and especially because law enforcement was directed to deal with this crisis. It actually took 2 days to bring it under control, and in the meantime all sorts of things were going on. The next day was Thursday, the 2nd of April. Now, it was before the Easter and Passover weekend, and the jewellers of Hatton Garden had deposited their goods in the safe deposit box in the Hatton Garden vault. Now, they believed that their jewels and their own livelihoods were safe. It's estimated that this vault contained about 100 million to 200 million worth of precious gems, gold and silver at this time. There was actually a queue to get into the jewellery deposit box area on Thursday night, but by 8:20 p.m. the deposits had all been made and staff locked up the vault and went away for the long weekend. The Hatton Garden safe deposit facility was known to be one of the most secure buildings in London. It had thick concrete walls, multiple locks and state-of-the-art alarm systems. But not long after closing on Thursday night, when no doubt the owners were already kicking up their heels and relaxing for the weekend, they received a text alert from their security monitoring company. And after contacting the chief custodian guard for the vault, one of the owners made their way to Hatton Garden by car. The chief guard arrived at 1 a.m. and he looked around, couldn't find any sign of forced entry on the front door of the building or the fire exit. Nothing seemed out of place, so he called the owner to let him know. Now, the owner was nearly there. He was just 5 minutes away by car. But hearing from the guard that there was no sign of a break-in, he decided to head back home, believing everything was A-OK. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was something to do with that fire that was raging. Anyway, the chief guard met with the police, who arrived shortly after to investigate, and they all dismissed the incident, concluding that a police response wasn't required. They didn't enter the building at all. Little did they know that they could have stopped what has been deemed the most daring jewellery heist in the world. The long weekend finished without any other incident, and staff at the Hatton Garden Vault returned to work on Tuesday, the 7th of April. Now, this 7-storey building that housed the vault looked the same as it did when they'd left the previous Thursday. The main wooden door at the entrance remained locked as usual until 9 a.m, when it's open and the lobby is then manned by security guards. Out of hours, staff could still gain entry to the building using their keys and digital PIN codes to enter through various locked doors within the building. And although the building contains an elevator, it's only used to access the upper floors. It had actually been disabled some 40 odd years prior after a previous break-in. By the elevator was a set of stairs that staff went down to the basement to access the vault. And at the bottom of the stairs there's yet another locked door. And during business hours, 2 security guards guard this door, but it's left open during the day. Once you pass through that door, there's another door with an alarm system for the vault, and again another digital code to enter the vault. And you only have 60 seconds to deactivate it. Once you get through that, there's yet another obstacle to gaining entry, a sliding iron gate. Now this forms an egg with a second sliding gate, and they're also manned by security guards, as well as a security code to gain entry, and a security guard who allows entry into the second gate to let you through. So inside this locked area there are also some shutters which are locked, and behind them is the disused elevator shaft. that used to be used to gain access to this basement level. Now these shutters are kept shut and they're only ever opened if it's required to access the elevator shaft, maybe for maintenance or someone's dropped their keys inside it or something like that. Now what all this means is that it is difficult to gain access to the vault area. There are numerous entry points and they require keys and digital codes and passing through security guards to gain entry. There is an abundance of locked doors, alarm systems, and during business hours the added addition of those security guards. Now even after you've passed through all of that, you've still got to get to the safe, and that was actually enclosed in a 20-inch thick solid concrete wall. That is huge. Saying that though, it's not the only way to gain access to the vault, but we'll come back to that later. But when the chief security guard arrived at work that Tuesday, he was stunned. He was immediately met by another guard, and that guard told him, "I think we've been robbed." Going down to the vault, the guard noticed the top lock from the door was missing. Looking through the hole where that lock should have been, instead of seeing the safe deposit boxes inside, he sees chaos. On the floor there were drills and pipes and cutting tools, things that were definitely not meant to be in a secure safe deposit system. It was time to call the police. They showed up after 20 minutes. Bear in mind that they were at capacity dealing with this raging fire, and then they all entered the secure vault. Inside it was worse than they could have expected, having looked through the hole in the door. It was total chaos. One described it like a bomb had hit the place. Safe deposit boxes were opened all over the place, but not all of the 999 boxes inside the vault had been opened. By 9 a.m, a massive police presence was at the scene. The streets were also filled with the box holders and, of course, insurance assessors who had all been alerted to the robbery by media coverage on TV. The crime scene showed that the robbers had gained access to the vault by drilling a hole through the reinforced concrete wall. Then they drilled through the vault's wall to bypass that main vault door. The hole was roughly the size of a human being, and the robbers had used heavy-duty equipment to bore through that 20-inch thick concrete wall. Once inside, the gang had disabled the alarm and surveillance systems, and this would have taken them several hours to do, and the noise would not be heard from outside, bearing in mind the position of the vault and, of course, the noise from the fire near the area. They then proceeded to break into the safe deposit boxes, and there were 999 boxes inside the vault. And initially, because of the chaotic scene inside the vault, it was initially thought that 300 boxes were broken into. But in the end, the number was far less, at just over 70 boxes. Now, there was no rhyme or reason as to why these boxes were selected, and it just seemed purely random without any system. A large amount of jewellery and other valuable items were stolen, but because they were in safe deposit boxes, it's really unclear as to what and how much was taken. And the robbery seemed quite contradictory. The planning and skill required to make the break-in would have required a logical and well-organised mind, but the scene inside the vault was the complete opposite, with just pure chaos and disruption. Over the following days, the police carried out extensive investigations, which included analysing CCTV footage, interviewing witnesses, and carrying out forensic examinations. The burning question was, how on earth did they manage to break in to such a state-of-the-art security system without triggering the alarm system? Now, due to the specialist nature of the robbery, it was handed over to the specialist division called the Flying Squad, and they usually only take cases where someone was harmed or there were firearms, but in this case there were neither. But the amount stolen in this robbery and the planning that it required meant that the case was passed to the specialists. Initially, the Flying Squad chief thought that the goods and cash stolen could have been worth as much as £200 million. What became immediate apparent, though, was not all boxes had been hit. Only 70 odd had been broken into, and it doesn't seem that they were targeted. It seems that it was random. Robbing a sophisticated facility like the Hatton Garden vault is not something that is carried out on a whim. A lot of planning and resources is required to pull something of that magnitude off. Specialist tools and knowledge is needed, and you need a crew of experts. This is the sort of criminal activity that can take years to plan and a whole lot of money. Although the building has many security cameras, the thieves were smart enough to take the hard drives of the security system, and they were also able to steal the CCTV cameras inside the actual building and its basement vault. What they forgot or didn't know was that one little camera in the walkway outside the back of the jewellers was still working, and it was recording what they were doing. They were analogue criminals in a digital world, as the prosecutor would later say, and they were no match for digital detectives. After analysing all the footage, the police believed that they had identified their subjects from the CCTV. In going through the footage, they discovered on the Thursday night, after Hatton Garden had closed for the long weekend, a white van with two men walked towards the building. Another, who was carrying a holdall, went to the rear of the building with a bag on his shoulder, and he was putting it over his face so the cameras couldn't pick it up. He seems to have had a key as he enters the back of the property, and they kept their heads down, avoiding the cameras. This was where the thieves had an advantage. There was a fire exit at the back of the street. Iron stairs went down to the courtyard adjoining the basement where the vault was, and only two businesses had a key to the outside lock on this street-level fire exit. And from the inside, when you enter through that courtyard, it's merely locked with a hand-operated bolt. No keys required to open it. So the Hatton Garden basement can be accessed from the courtyard by a door with two sliding bolt locks. But that door leads to the basement foyer, and behind that is that airlock. This is where things went odd again. On Friday morning, Good Friday, the men were caught on CCTV around 8 a.m. leaving the building. But they didn't have any bags with them. So where were the jewels? The police had one really good lead, which was the white van that was parked in the area. Using their technology, they were able to track the movements of the van, but that ended up a dead end. Going back and looking at more footage, they ended up releasing it to the public 3 weeks later. And the shocking thing was that the men shown on surveillance weren't young whippersnappers. They were elderly. They were, for the most part, senior citizens. The men were nicknamed by the media as Mr. Ginger, Mr. Strong, Mr. Montana, the gent, the tall man, and the old man. And their age gave them actually some sympathy from the general public, who felt that the poor old guys deserved it. It was even treated as a bit of a joke. While meanwhile, businesses had lost money, insurance premiums skied high, and some businesses ended up closing down completely. While the police were still investigating, not only did news of the value of the robbery, which was now estimated to be between 14 and 200 million pounds, hit the media, but the Daily Mirror newspaper also managed to get a hold of CCTV footage of the robbers, and they aired that on the television, websites, and in the paper. And the police followed up by releasing that footage of the suspects to the public. They were hoping that someone would recognise them and come forward, preferably a girlfriend or a wife that might be feeling guilty and be involved. And although the CCTV wasn't from the Hatton Garden building, it was from the multitude of cameras around the surrounding area. So they had a lot of evidence of the suspects that helped them piece together what happened. Oddly though, Friday night wasn't the only time the thieves entered the building. CCTV footage caught them again entering on Saturday night. This is confusing, as why would you return to the place that you'd robbed the night before? The idea is to get in and get out as fast as possible. It was extremely risky behaviour. Not only that, the crew seemed to have shrank, as there were not the number of men that there were the previous evening. The public at this stage were blaming the victims of the robbery for having so many valuables, and the police for failing to investigate that first alarm that was triggered. The police later apologised for this at a press conference. The flying squad, in the meantime, were kept busy combing through 350 pieces of evidence and watching days of CCTV footage from the surrounding areas. Fortunately, the thieves left a number of clues behind. Although they left a lot of tools, there was no DNA though. They were smart enough to wear gloves, but they did actually leave a mobile phone, and police were able to use this to extract quite a bit of information, including text messages and call logs. It didn't take long for the police to realise that the way that the thieves had gained access was through a key. Rather than go through multiple doors and keypads, they'd simply made their way to the vault through the disused elevator shaft. Of course, they needed to deactivate the alarm, and they must have had a specialist to do that, even though they still managed to trigger the alarm company. Going back and looking at the surveillance, the police discovered that before the Saturday night break-in, a white Mercedes with a black roof was in the area, and the car was really distinctive. The camera caught two men getting out of the car, one wearing a fluoro vest like construction workers wear, and they walked to the back of the vault entrance. Using number plate recognition, police were able to locate the car in a nearby suburb, and they set up surveillance. And they were stunned when an elderly man was seen regularly using the car. He was a 74-year-old grandfather, but he wasn't the usual grandfather. He was a career criminal with a history starting back in the 1960s. The police took their time with their surveillance because they wanted to catch the whole gang, and they also wanted to try and recover as much of the stolen goods as they could. Following Collins led the police to a rendezvous he had with Brian Reader. Now, he was well known to police for a lot of things, including his previous criminal activities. He was considered to be a leader and had an ability to really plan crimes out. They soon tracked them to the pub, where they discovered Collins with Daniel Jones and Terence Perkins all having a drink. As Collins was under surveillance, one of the surveillance managed to record the meet-up, and they were having a great time. Later, a lip reader was used to transcribe the footage, and the gist of it was that these boys were having a bit of a brag. They were laughing and joking that they'd pulled off what the media was calling the greatest jewel theft of the century, and they thought they'd been pretty clever. And even though the media had named them Dad's Army due to their age, their whole conversation consisted of a recap of the great heist that they'd pulled off, and no one knew about it. And they cleared up some of the oddities of the robbery, like why did they return the next night? The crew laughed about how the hydraulic pump they'd bought broke and they had to abandon the job on Friday night. They planned for a 3-day heist, and one of their members, a type 1 diabetic, had even taken insulin to last the duration, but they had to abandon the long weekend of robbing when they came up against the fact that the steel boxes were actually bolted to the floor. They hadn't anticipated that and hadn't planned on that and needed far better tools, considering the pump had now broken. They also discussed how they were going to dispose of the goods, what their plans were, what they were going to do with their money. One of them wanted to buy a flat and get money every week for rent. Another one wanted to pay for his daughter's holiday. And much of the conversation was taken up with denigrating Reader and Wood. Eventually, the police, using the same number plate recognition, actually traced Collins' car to a shop where the replacement pump was purchased on Saturday, and they actually caught them on CCTV making that purchase so that the job could go ahead on Saturday night. And not long after, they managed to install electronic surveillance on Collins and Jones's car. Now, this was a big thing because usually that was reserved for organised crime. By mid-May, from listening to the bug, the police had another name, Carl Wood, and it was then that the police realised how bungled this job was. Initially, Reader had planned the job and got the crew on board, but when that pump broke on Friday night, Reader took it as a sign that it was too risky to continue, so he walked out on the job that he'd planned. Carl Wood, who was just a small-time crook, he followed suit and quit while he was ahead. But Collins wasn't going to abandon this one last job, especially after he'd planned for so long and spent so much. So he and the other two, they decided to soldier on. That meant they were without their logical leader and planner of the job. They're also down on manpower, lookouts and getaway drivers. So no wonder it was chaos in the vault with the three old men desperately trying to get what they could and get out. Mistakes were made, including bringing Colin's own personal car, the distinctive Mercedes, to the area. And none of the men so far had any specialist electronic knowledge. So as far as the police knew, there must be another person involved. And eventually, they caught a new name in the surveillance. It was Basil. This must be the electronics expert because none of the others were known for that skill. They really wanted to get Basil because he was the one who had the key to the building. And from the surveillance, they knew that he was the one that was the electronics expert, ensuring that the alarm didn't go completely off. Although the other men in this old age pensioner group had all been identified, Basil was savvy enough to stay clear of anything that could ID him on CCTV. On camera footage, he had a bag in front of his face, and police concluded that he was wearing a wig, and it took a long time before police realised that there was one thing about Basil that was really distinctive, and that was the way he walked. He had a way of putting one leg in front of the other that was actually really noticeable when you were looking for it. They were pretty sure they had 3 of the crew, but they were determined to get them all. And they also knew at some stage that they were going to divvy up these money and stolen goods that they had stolen, and they wanted to catch them red-handed and try and recover the goods. From their surveillance, they soon realised that the broken pump had also caused another knock-on effect. Dad's army were busy bragging about their big score, but they still hadn't divided up the goods. They'd originally planned to do it at Colin's house during the long weekend when his wife was away, but that broken pump and the extra time getting it meant that they didn't have time on the weekend. So they set about to stash the money in places. One gave it to somebody else who then buried it in the cemetery. Another stashed some of it in the kitchen dishes in his home. And it seems from the surveillance that much of the goods was being stashed in multiple places. Collins, the new leader of the group, actually gave his money to his girlfriend's brother, Bill Lincoln, who was a 60-year-old crook. He suffered from incontinence, sleep apnea, and he had a double hip replacement, and he should have really been watching Coronation Street rather than trying to stash hot jewels. While the police had a lot of good stuff though, they really needed to catch them in the act so that they could make their arrest, because they had nothing linking them directly to the crime. No DNA, no fingerprints, and not the jewels. At this moment, they were just a bunch of bad grandpas that were bragging about things, but did they actually do it? Later on, the police were able to catch some surveillance which pointed to a handover for the goods. Now, Collins was organising this, and he decided in his wisdom that the place to hand over would be a public parking lot right next to a workshop of a plumber, and he was going to get his nephew, a taxi driver, to deliver the stolen goods to that handover point. Now, once the flying squad had this information, they knew what they had to do, and they hit the ground running. Flying squad were watching every move on the 19th of May, and while Dad's army transferred 3 canvas holdalls of jewellery from the taxi to Colin's Mercedes, the police were simultaneously raiding 12 addresses, including the parking lot, surrounding them front and back and sides and hitting them all simultaneously. There are over 200 police officers involved in this operation, some in riot gear using battering rams to get through the doors and dragging out their suspects and those they suspected of being their accomplices. Lincoln, the old guy that had a hip replacement, he was said to have wet his pants when the police came. Reader was escorted from his old mansion a little unsteady on his legs, and he was clutching his heart, according to his neighbour. Terry Perkins, Danny Jones and Kenny Collins were at the dining room table. They had a smelter set up to melt $2.9 and $4.4 million worth of precious jewels in the holdalls when the police burst through the front door in their riot gear and with a battering ram. Jones tried to leg it out the back door, but he didn't make it far before he was caught. And once in custody, they all pretended they didn't know each other. They kept their mouths shut and tried to see what they could do to get out of it. But once part of the audio recordings were played to them, they realised the gig was up, and they quickly admitted to their involvement and as well incriminated others as well. Kenny Collins, he apparently didn't even ask for bail. He just said, "I'd rather have a cup of tea." From listening to the surveillance, the police realised that the gang had thought that no one would ever suspect them. Due to their age, everyone would bypass them because they thought the police were looking for fit, able people who could have committed the crime. But that wasn't the case. At one of the properties, they even found the blue overalls worn by the repairman in the elevator when it was reportedly running slow prior to that theft. And after Jones was arrested, his computer indicated that he'd been looking at drilling online and drill tech sites as far back as April 2012. That's 3 years before the robbery. And he also had a handy book at his home, Forensics for Dummies, which promised that now everyone can get the lowdown on the science behind crime scene investigations. He pleaded guilty, and it's a shame that they didn't maybe read a little bit more on the chapter on mobile phones and electronic license surveillance. The police ended up recovering about a third of the estimated 14 million pounds at all of these raids, but what they didn't get was any sign of Basil. In 2016, in March, the three main members of the gang that were left behind that actually carried out the robbery, John Kenny Collins, Daniel Jones and Terry Perkins, they all pleaded guilty and each received a 7-year prison term. 2 months later, Brian Reeder, who had initially planned the robbery, he pleaded guilty as well and received a sentence of 6 years and 3 months. Carl Wood and William Lincoln and John Harbison, the taxi driver, and Hugh Doyle, that owned the plumber's workshop, they were all charged with conspiracy to commit burglary and conspiracy to conceal, convert or transfer criminal property. Wood and Lincoln were found guilty and received a 7-year sentence, whereas Hugh Doyle was jailed for 21 months and suspended for 2 years. And John Harbison, the taxi driver, he was found not guilty. He always claimed that he knew nothing about it. But as well as their prison sentences, the gang was also subject to confiscation orders where they had to pay a huge amount of money. For some of them, it was up to £27 million, and if they didn't pay it, they'd get another 7 years in prison. Some of them did, make a few dollars towards it, but not nearly the whole amount. And even though Collins paid £732,000, but they still didn't have all the gang. They still haven't ID'd Basil. He was elusive. He hadn't joined the crew on the second night of the robbery, and although he'd been briefly mentioned in one of the surveillance tapes, no one knew who he was and no one was talking. As for the mysterious Basil, he was still at large, along with 2/3 of the haul, probably more than £15 million. Who knows? Reviewing the surveillance when the police were following Kenny Collins, they noticed that he met a man, and he met that man again a little while later, and they appeared to know each other. This was their only clue. One thing was particularly unusual about this man. The way he walked was quite distinctive. It was just like the Basil character from the CCTV footage. And they were eventually able to track this man down to North London and ID him. His name wasn't Basil. He was Michael Seed, the son of a Cambridge academic. He was living off the grid with no job, no phone, and he didn't talk to anyone. He didn't access a car, and he paid for everything in cash. Police watched him for 2 years. He was skilled in anti-surveillance techniques, and like Basil, he was the same size and build, and they were similar, but not enough to apply for a search warrant. But they both had that particular gait, that walking style, and that was what gave them enough for a search warrant. The flying squad ended up searching the property. They found jewellery, electrical devices, computers and gold bars, and those gold bars were numbered and identified from the Hatton Garden robbery. Seed didn't cooperate with police interviews, and he was charged with burglary and conspiracy to burgle. He was found guilty in March 2019 and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was also ordered to repay $6 million £6 million in damages or face an additional 7 years. So finally, the police got all their men, even if it took them an extra 2 years to get the elusive Basil. They still got them all, but they've never really recovered all of the stolen goods because no one is quite sure what there was and where it went. Oh, and that fire in the underground that police originally thought was a diversion, maybe set up by the robbers to get the law enforcement in another direction and evacuate the area. It turns out it wasn't related. It was just something that the robbers were actually able to take advantage of. But isn't it fascinating that these old guys, they just wanted to do one last big score, and if they'd stuck with their plan, maybe they would have got away with it. Anyway, that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.